All right, so we're 1 minute past 2 p.m. Eastern time, so I think we can get started here. Once again, for those who just joined, this is session 4B, data security and privacy. We will try to make this session as exciting and not so much like your annual security assessments that are, required to be studied and performed, but we'll try to, keep it engaging, keep it fun. This is a great time to ask questions. Why do we do annual security assessments? Should I be paying more attention? Why do I keep, clicking through these videos and slides? What is the actual importance of it? And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to get across in this session is what are the actual real world repercussions from lack of data security and lack of data privacy? What do these security breaches look like? How do they occur? Who have they occurred to? And how can we sort of avoid and mitigate those? So I'll jump to the next slide here. I am your host for the next 30 minutes. My name is Nick Santamarina. I'm head of Platform Insights here at MindBridge. Platform Insights is really our technical sales engineering team. I may have spoken to some of you in the past, might be speaking to some of you in the future, but very, very happy to be here with everyone. I come from more of an automation technical background, started off my career at KPMG, moved on to a startup, which was acquired by Microsoft, and now here, very, very happily at MindBridge. So really, you'll see that I'm not sort of part of an IT department or have real IT experience. So it's sort of coming to this session from a bit of a different perspective. I mentioned to you guys, I have to go through security assessments. I've had to go through security assessments for the entirety of my career in many different companies. I know that in some circumstances, they might not be the most entertaining, but I'm going to try and make this session a little bit more lighthearted and try to sort of show a different perspective on security assessments and how can we actually help ourselves and help our organizations and companies be a little bit more secure. You can see the picture on the screen here. I was at with one of our partners, SAPIO, at one of their events in Berlin. I do travel quite a bit with MindBridge, so if I'm not here in New York City, which is sort of my home base, I'm most likely on the road somewhere. But to get started, I wanted to sort of give first a high-level glance of sort of what is the problem and this long history of data breaches, cybersecurity attacks, the whole concept of hackers and how do they get access to data, to systems. And the reality is we face quite a pervasive challenge, quite a pervasive dilemma in all industries across the world, which is how do we keep data secure? Just 6 out of many different companies that have gone through sort of data breaches in the past or have gone through sort of cybersecurity attacks in the past. You can see the extensive volume of the amount of data that's being sort of extracted from these different companies. I mean, Yahoo had 3 billion accounts leaked between 2013 and 2016, which is really a massive number. But you see some of these household names, which we're all probably very familiar with. And, we sometimes aren't aware of the extent of the problem and how pervasive it is and why do we actually do these security assessments and why we should be paying a little bit more attention to them. If we go through a couple of these, we'll talk a little bit about how these data breaches occur and how we can prevent them and help avoid them in the future. But just diving into a couple of these, I mean, you look at Capital One, which had 100 million credit card applications leaked in 2019. It really starts with one individual. And as you're probably well aware with MindBridge and the way we operate in the finance industry, looking for anomalies and looking for potential fraud or errors, these do have motive. These individuals have motive. They're looking to attack and they're looking to extract data. I mean, Capital One, as an example, was an AWS engineer who's no longer with AWS, but had access to a server and was able to extract this information, including social security numbers, different bank account information. So quite private data. If we look at something like Marriott Starwood, they had 500 million user reservation individuals extracted in 2018. What an individual did was they through phishing, which is a topic that we'll touch on in a second, were able to deploy a Trojan virus into the Marriott reservation database, and they were able to extract all of this information, which included, addresses, password information, reservation information, where they were staying, where they were going, dates and times, all sort of information that's quite valuable to these organizations. When it comes to another one, let's see Home Depot here, 50 million credit cards in 2014. This one's quite interesting. This attack occurred through a third-party vendor, which is a topic that I want to touch on here. It's a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is stealing credentials from a third-party vendor who had access to the Home Depot network, where the hackers then elevated privileges within the Home Depot network and moved laterally to change their access and their privileges, which would grant them access to their POC or POS system, which is point of sale system, where they were able to slowly extract through a backdoor credit card information from customers. So really quite a big problem. I mean, LinkedIn, you might have heard about it. It was a little bit more recent. Sort of a famous hacker in the space, Tom Linner, accessed their API, a little bit more of a complex sort of form of attack, but accessed their API to extract account information for LinkedIn users. Another one, which is a little bit more sort of on the phishing side, was Facebook sending emails, requesting information, requesting access to systems to be able to then gain access to the network and extract information. So you can see here, quite a few big names. And if I just pull up a site that I stumbled upon during analysis, I actually quite like this. Information is beautiful.net. You'll see that these are just a few of the names out of hundreds that we see on a regular basis, going back to, anywhere around 2010, 2009. You can see that this problem is becoming more and more pervasive in the space. And you'll see there's some very big names here that have undergone or gone through hacks or data breaches. So let's take a look at why does this occur. But before that, we'll go a little quote here from someone who you most likely know, was on the news. I think there's a Netflix show about him, Edward Snowden. No matter who you are, every day of your life, you're sitting in a database just ready to be looked at. So all the information that our organizations have around our customers, our vendors, ourselves, our employees, all of that data needs to be securely managed and securely stored to prevent, this problem from becoming more and more pervasive in the space. If we jump here to the next slide, let's take a look at how some of these breaches occur. So I would say these are the top 5 types of breaches that occur when you're looking at extracting data from different data sources or from organizations. One is quite common. You most likely know of it. It's around stolen credentials. Don't leave a Post-it note with your password on your desk. Don't try not to lose your laptop. Especially don't leave a Post-it note on your laptop if you get it stolen or if you lose it. But having complex passwords is usually a good solution to try and prevent, passwords from being recovered or stolen. Multi-factor authentication, I'm sure we're all familiar with that. But the fact that passwords can be stolen both physically and online are very important to make sure that we keep that in mind. Social engineering. This one is probably the most interesting one in my mind, and probably the one that's the most pervasive. I'll touch on at the end, but or after this slide, is that a lot of these forms of attack are grouped together, and a lot of them start with social engineering. I mentioned you're probably familiar with phishing emails. They usually are individuals who impersonate themselves as organizations or even as employees within your organization to try to extract information from you to gain access to these systems, right? I mean, if we talk about Home Depot as that example, that started as a phishing email to a vendor who had access to the network, right? So making sure that your vendors are secure, that they have best security practices in place is really protecting yourself as well. So again, impersonating different organizations or different individuals, either typically through email, potentially through phone calls, through voicemails, any sort of form of communication, chat bots, online. They always say never share your social security number, but there's a lot of stuff you probably shouldn't share unless you're very sure of who you're speaking to, or who you're communicating with. Next one here is vulnerability attacks. This is, again, quite pervasive around different vendors within sort of your network, right? Making sure that, you may think that your software and your technology is safe. You have the best practices in place to protect yourselves. You've gone through a series of certifications, a series of audits to make sure that everything is protected. But if you're working with organizations that don't have those security practices in place, you are putting yourself in a weakness as well. We talk about sort of where data lives, and we'll talk about that in another slide here, but what data do you have in different SaaS solutions or different software that you use on a regular basis can find ways to get access to your core systems as well. So making sure that when you're evaluating different software solutions, that you're asking the right questions, and you're putting the best sort of practices in place. Malware, commonly known as viruses, antiviruses, making sure we're not clicking links that we don't know what they are. Looking at HTTP addresses, looking at web addresses to make sure that we're not accessing sites that we're unfamiliar with or that might not be secure. These are typical ways of having sort of viruses installed within your firewall or within your network, which can then again, leak out data sort of around whether it's credentials or whether it's usernames or passwords or different ways of accessing your network further. I mean, again, going back to the Home Depot example, once credentials were shared, they were within the network, and once they were within the network, they elevated their privileges, meaning that they had access to more data, more information, more systems within that organization, which allowed them to extract more valuable information. Looking at last one here, lack of encryption. Any communication over the internet which is not encrypted can be publicly seen at any point. So making sure that all sort of when you're thinking about sending emails, or when you're passing data along to an individual, or when you're receiving data, making sure that all sources are encrypted prior to engaging in any sort of activity like that. Typical standards are TLS 1.2 in transit and AES 256 at rest. But we'll touch on that in just a little bit here. Feel free to ask questions. We do have moderators in the chat. If there are questions, I'll sort of tackle those at the end. But jumping into the who and why, and I always laugh at sort of this face, right? It's the typical hacker mask. But who and why is sort of the big question here. I would say that most cybersecurity threats are to sort of profit off of the data that's being extracted from organizations. And even surprising sort of stat for me is this table here, which is looking at the price of data that can be sold on the black market depending on the nature of that data. So you can sort of see top to bottom here, bank details, $259 per individual's bank details is sort of the prevailing price on the market, which is sort of astounding to me. Debit card information, PayPal information, credit card information, Western Union information, even things like your Amazon account, proof of identity, passports. You sort of think about the aggregation of data when it comes to sort of what are we extracting from systems. If we look at sort of a social security number, or we look at a name and a date of birth, and we combine that with a list of potential passport numbers, or a list of potential addresses, or a list of potential bank accounts, all this information can be aggregated and sorted so that you are dealing with not only just your name and your date of birth, but aggregating bank account information, address information, social security numbers to create sort of a more rich data set. But going beyond that, what sort of selling data on the dark web, there are other motives as well. I mean, there are some complex social engineering attacks, political motives. We're all very familiar with sort of, again, Edward Snowden and releasing NSA information, and we're very aware of sort of how do those repercussions take place in Congress and Senate here in the U.S. and the FBI investigating further. And we're all well aware of Russian attacks as well. In fact, the attack on Yahoo was actually conducted by Russian spies, which were hired to sort of look for data for key individuals, and then that sort of release of data became more and more expansive. So we are protecting against sort of political motives as well when it comes to sort of data protection and cyber attacks. But then there are personal motives as well. I mean, if we think about the Capital One, which I didn't mention here, that individual who extracted that data, the AWS engineer, was bragging on GitHub, saying, "Hey, look, I got a hold of this data. Look how easy it is to hack a Fortune 500 organization like this." So there are personal motives as well to sort of add to sort of some of these key ones. And again, it's really, it can take place in many different forms, and the motives can be quite extensive. It can be a combination of multiple of these, but they're really important to take into account. So lightening up the conversation a little bit, how do we prevent and protect against sort of further organizations? And bear with me here, it might sound a bit too preachy around making sure you pay attention to your annual risk assessments, but hopefully you're starting to get an understanding of how big the problem actually is. And before I jump into this, I think looking at those six different enterprises on the previous screen there, on a few screens back, I think the amount that was the amount that was a consequence of those data breaches for those organizations collectively were most likely above $500 million, if not closer to $1 billion. I mean, Yahoo had to pay, massive settlements. They had to sort of deal with massive legal fees. So did Home Depot, so did LinkedIn, so did Marriott. They all sort of have to pay the consequences for those. So it's important to consider sort of the ROI of making sure that we're all taking part in protecting our organizations, our companies, and ourselves, right? So the best protection starts with you. Naturally, it's within yourself and your organization to make sure that you're taking your training, you're encouraging others to take training, you're encouraging others to pay attention, because of the extent of the repercussions that can occur. Accessing private information, think of where it's being stored, where it's being sent, who's accessing it, where they're accessing it from. We live in a world where we're looking at many different cloud solutions, MindBridge being one of them. We're looking at different tools constantly, accessing different things in our browser, emailing data, dropping data into Dropboxes or into different file shares. Make sure that when you're sending data that's private or important information over to someone else, or you're accessing it from somewhere, make sure you sort of have a sense of where it's coming from or what you're doing with that data and where you're sending it. I think that's sort of at least a preliminary understanding of sort of what are we doing with data is very important here. A topic that I often sort of handle on my day-to-day job is InfoSec reviews. When individuals look to sort of move forward with MindBridge, we typically want to go through some form of InfoSec assessment. InfoSec assessments, information security, are typically a series of questionnaires or one questionnaire asking some critical questions around how does MindBridge stay protected? How does MindBridge store customer and client data? And how can we sort of help protect and prevent different cyber threats from attacking us? So making sure that when you're looking at vendors or when you're looking at technologies, you're making sure that you sort of have InfoSec reviews in place. Another way to stay protected, and this is for your vendors as well as organizations individually, is making sure that you go through InfoSec audits and certifications. There are many organizations that can help you with them. I don't believe they're terribly expensive, but they are sometimes a bit taxing on the team. But listen, peace of mind is better than no peace of mind, right? So making sure we'll touch on the next slide, but looking at different organizations to help you be more secure and have better data practices. And then the last one, of course, is ask questions and be alert. Phishing, again, we talked about it. It is probably the most pervasive of cyber security threats that we see on a regular basis. And, sometimes laugh at them. Oh, you get a weird email in your spam and you're like, oh, this definitely isn't a real email. It's not from my boss and they're not asking me for my social security number, because that's definitely not my boss asking for that, or they're not asking for my phone number. But they are quite extensive and they can become more and more harder to detect. So make sure that, again, when you're looking at your emails, make sure before you answer anything, even if you're in a hurry, looking at your phone, answering on your phone, make sure you just always look at who the sender is, look at the text, look at the signatures in emails, all sort of best practices, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but just reiterating the importance of that. Jumping to the next slide here and using MindBridge as an example, because to be honest, I'm quite proud of where we are as an organization in terms of key audits and certifications and testing. Our CTO, you may have heard him during the keynote, is quite on top of the ball here when it comes to this, and we do really invest in best secure development practices when it comes to our solution. Our list of sub-processors and the vendors we work with, and the places where we store our data is sort of top of industry. And using us as an example, these are sort of three key pillars of sort of where our security or information security foundation starts. So the first one here is ISO 27001. This is an international standard, and it really assists organizations with managing policies and procedures for information and data. So providing a framework and making sure that organizations are aligning to that framework when it comes to information security management is sort of the critical component of ISO 27001. You're all probably very familiar with SOC 2 Type 2. This is another cybersecurity audit, which is performed on organizations to demonstrate, the organizations have robust corporate compliance. The five sort of major areas of SOC 2 are around security, availability, processing, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So again, a great way to make sure that an organization that you're working with or your organization is staying on top of the ball in those five categories. And then the last one here is around penetration testing. Penetration testing is usually done through a third party. It can be done internally as well, but it's certainly more preferable to be done through a third party. And it's to test system for vulnerabilities. You're replicating scenarios where there may be attacks on your software, on your systems, and organizations replicate these attacks to determine sort of what the impact will be on business operations and what the extent of these real world scenarios could be on your system. So I like to say, sort of at a minimum or a good foundation, a little bit more than just at a minimum, look for these three things. Ask for these three things, investigate them further, to make sure that, again, your organization, the organizations you're working with, sort of leverage these three tools to sort of assist with making sure that strong information security procedures are in place. You can see here, Align is an organization that MindBridge uses to assist with our ISO certification as well as our penetration testing. There are many different organizations out there that can assist you with this. It's important to keep them all in mind. So as we sort of round this out, a couple of the right questions to be asked. You'll have my contact information at the end of this, so you can always reach out to me personally. I'd be more than happy to sort of share with you what we do here at MindBridge, and what we've been exposed to as well, and what I've been exposed to throughout my career. But a couple key things. What certifications do you have in place? Are you SOC 2 certified? Are you ISO certified? How is your data? How is data encrypted? How are roles and access managed in your solution and your tool? Again, thinking about Home Depot, that lateral move by elevating privileges, there are ways to prevent that directly through roles-based access control and different access approval methods. Do you have information around personnel controls? Employees, are they being trained correctly? Are they going through annual security assessments? Are they going through annual refreshers around security assessments? Do they have the correct documents and policies to refresh their memory on when it comes to that? Are their laptops encrypted? Are their cell phones encrypted? Are you using encrypted emails? All of that is really important around personnel as well. What is your data loss prevention policy is a good one. What other integration dependencies do you have? That one's really interesting because you work with one enterprise and then that enterprise works with a whole bunch of enterprises, right? So if I'm sending data to one organization which uses that, let's say, for some form of analytics, right? Who else are they leveraging to assist them with that service? That's a really, MindBridge has a list of sub-processors and the extent of the data that's shared with them. We have that publicly on our site, so that's an important one that you may ask individuals or organizations as well. InfoSec questionnaires. Do we have an InfoSec questionnaire? Should we be sending out InfoSec questionnaires? How do we score InfoSec questionnaires are really important. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, how do we authenticate into tools, into solutions, really important. And then of course the data one, which is where is our data stored? Are there backups of our data? What happens in the event of a data loss? What happens in the event of a disruption in business continuity? Those are all sort of important points to keep in mind as well. With the few minutes we have left, I'm going to jump through 3 more slides, which are a little bit more of an example of how MindBridge maintains sort of best principles in the industry. Looking at encryption from data protection in transit to data protection at rest, segregation of customer data. Each client of MindBridge has their own segregated tenant installation with specific credentials in place. System integrity, everything within MindBridge is containerized, protecting the application from cloud infrastructure and other applications. And then of course, data retention, how long does MindBridge hold on to your data? How long do organizations, other enterprises that you work with hold on to your data? Do we want to consider removing data after a certain period? How long is data stored in backups as well here at the end? MindBridge runs on Microsoft Azure, which is a worldwide sort of staple in the industry for secure data storage and management. Important to know where your data is living, where are the recovery sites for data, is there load balancing, is there hot cold storage, is there hot storage, where are our disaster recovery sites, how far away are they from our primary sites, making sure that if you're an organization in Europe and you want to have your data stored in Europe, that you're asking that of your vendors. So with that, about a minute left here. I will take a second here to ask any questions. And as I jump to the last slide, our 30 minutes flew by, at least they flew by for me. But you have my information here. Please shoot me an email anytime. There will be a recording of this session if you want to go back and revisit. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And thank you for joining Edge. Enjoy some of the other sessions. There's certainly some really exciting ones. I'm definitely going to go back and rewatch a couple. It's going on until tomorrow. So thank you all. And I will see if there are any questions so far, but I think we are good. Thank you everyone for joining.